will remain in place to work on the implementation of the People's Decision and associated Dáil reform measures.
Thank you for your reply, and I think I tabled 3 questions in relation to this issue, and you have indeed made many claims in recent weeks that you believe in being accountable to the Dáil. You even held a press conference recently where you brandished the Constitution and said it was only to the Dáil that you were accountable. So I want to invite you to practice a bit of what you've been preaching lately in relation to that, and to answer for me and to explain for me the basis of a claim that you made during the passage of the legislation in the House, and one that you made in the House. And in proposing the Seanad abolition here, and many times since you've said that abolishing the Seanad would save 20 million per annum. You didn't say at the time that that was its cost. You said it would actually save that amount. And you've also said that you would hire 350 extra teachers with these savings. The problem, Taoiseach, is that no other person anywhere has said that that would be the saving. And I think it's important that we don't misquote what staff of the Oireachtas have been saying about this. No other person has said that that actually would be the saving. The 20 million cost figure includes pensions, which will continue to be paid, and services shared with the Dáil, which will be retained. And as we know, there's many, many millions of that have to do with ongoing expenditure, not purely related to the Seanad itself. So Taoiseach, in the spirit of your commitment to start being accountable to the House, can you now withdraw your false statement to the House that 20 million will be saved as a result of the abolition of the Seanad?
No is the answer to your question. The total running costs of the Seanad have been estimated independently by the Office of the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission to be in the region of 20 million per annum. That's based on the 2012 outturn, and it includes all direct and indirect, apportioned or indirect costs. Direct costs relating to Seanad members' salary, expenses and staff costs amount to 8.8 million. Indirect pay and non-pay costs of the supporting sections, that is the ICT section, the Office of the Superintendent, the procedural and support sections, amount to 9.3 million. There's also the annual cost of approximately 2 million in pensions. Pensions for former members are paid by Houses of the Oireachtas Commission under subhead 2.1, grant and aid in respect of Ciste pension hithe an Oireachtas. So clearly the amount of money involved here between direct and indirect savings is the only figure that has been put out there by an independent entity, which is the Oireachtas Commission, and it is based on their figures that the saving here of 20 million on the abolition of the Seanad will take place. And clearly, if the people decide to approve the referendum question and to abolish the Seanad, which I hope they will, that will mean that from the commencement of the next government, there will be no further senators elected. Therefore, the direct costs of that do not apply. Pensions do apply, of course. But in the case of that becoming a fact and the Seanad being abolished, no more than the amalgamation and the redeployment that has occurred in so many areas of the public service generally, persons currently working in areas associated with the Seanad will be deployed and work elsewhere. These figures stand up. They are the figures set out by the Oireachtas Commission, and I don't intend to reverse that.
The Commission is very clear, and others are very clear, that it's not possible to estimate the actual amount of net actual savings that would arise if the Seanad was abolished. And a very strong caveat has been put in, and you're the only person now, along with others in Fine Gael, who are sticking to the untruth and the dishonesty that's been perpetrated in relation to a claim that's a patently false claim. And no other person outside of the Fine Gael party, indeed maybe some of its Labour acolytes and others were on the yes side of this campaign, have dared to suggest that the actual savings would be 20 million. I mean, the cost this year would be 14 million, obviously, in terms of running the referendum, unless you're suggesting that you're going to, in some way, stop all pensions relating to the Seanad, or indeed lock up half of Leinster House, or turn off the heat, and many, many other things that would be necessary. It's a con job, Taoiseach, And I think what's happening on this issue, you've decided to go on the attack on this. This is your major plank in terms of the abolition of the Seanad. You're adopting tactics that I think would make Libertas or Youth Defence blush. You just keep repeating the mantra. Even if it's untrue, it doesn't matter. Just carry on. Keep on regardless. Keep up the untruth. That's all that matters now for the duration of the campaign. And I think going back to previous referendums and changes to our constitution, I don't think any former Taoiseach would continue to uphold a blatant untruth like this. And I think that you should take the opportunity afforded to you in the House to change that. And I'd also ask you, in terms of the notes that were prepared for you in relation to your speech, and the various speeches as the legislation went through, will you make those available to members of the House and all other documentation that the special unit that you established in preparation for the abolition of the Seanad, will you make all that documentation now public and available? Because I asked for that some time ago in advance of the legislation to share it with other members of the House. I think it's important that you would make it public and available, not just to members of the House, but the public in general.
I think it's. I don't accept your assertion at all, Deputy Martin, that this is a con job. Now, you have made statements yourself about the abolition of the Seanad, and about the retention of the Seanad, and the reform of the Seanad, that mean that you have not been consistent at all in your view about Seanad Éireann. You made an assertion recently that every party in this House campaigned that they would give the people an opportunity to vote on reform. You will recall that 4 years ago, I set out a view on this that was very clear. That in fact was the view of all the parties before the last election, including your own, that a referendum of the people would be held to ask them for their approval to abolish Seanad Éireann. A lot of people thought it would never happen. A lot of people thought that was a con job. A lot of people thought that this was some sort of political gimmick or political stunt that wouldn't actually apply. Well, now they know, because the question will be answered by the people on the 4th of October. And far from that being some sort of concept of a political power grab, in fact, there is nothing more democratic than asking the Irish people for their approval to a question: do you want to abolish the Seanad, or do you want to keep the Seanad? And I hope that they will answer that question very, very strongly. The 20 million is a figure that is not created by any political party or by any particular individual. It's a statement of the costs and the indirect costs and the pension requirements that are set out by the Oireachtas Commission. And that's completely independent of my party and yours and every other party in here. And I accept their figures and I stand by them. But this is not just about this particular issue, because this is part of the process, as we have discussed before, of changing the way politics actually operates in this House. Article 28.4 of our Constitution, Article 28.4 of our Constitution makes it very clear that it is this House here, this House, which has the constitutional responsibility to hold this government or any other government to account. That's where the authority is vested. But it has never been translated into a factual demonstration of the involvement of the people in a real way. And that's what's going to happen with the changes in the way that this House here, this Dáil Éireann, will be reformed. And that follows on, indeed, reducing the number of deputies, dealing with the questions of ministers' salaries and ministers' pensions, limiting corporate and political donations, regulating lobbying, and the changes that are being introduced to reform the way this House actually operates here. And also, as part of the broader impact of how we interact and engage with the European Union. And central to that, Deputy Martin, will be the demonstrable change in the way that committees are operated and run and that engage with people. I don't accept your view at all of what you say here. The information that you look for, as I understand it, Deputy Martin, is all available under freedom of information anyway, so I don't have a problem in supplying... yeah, okay, fine. I don't have any difficulty in putting that. I don't have any difficulty in putting that information, making it available on the website of the department. There's nothing to hide in it anyway. And as I said, Deputy, as every minister in every government who has to sponsor a piece of legislation, it is that department and officials in that department who prepare the proposition, and then the parliamentary draftsmen actually draft the legislation. So as the Department of the Taoiseach deals with protocol and matters of constitution and so on, those very small number of officials who are already working in other areas in the department worked on that proposition and that proposal, and the bill is then prepared by the parliamentary draftsmen. So insofar as making information that's available anyway, I don't have a difficulty in that at all. In fact, I'll send it on to you.
Deputy Adams.
Taoiseach, as you know, Sinn Féin wants to see the Seanad abolished in its current form. But we take serious issue with the way that you have dealt with this matter. I asked you on a number of occasions to put this in for discussion in the Constitutional Convention. You refused to do so. I actually attended the Constitutional Convention where the citizen delegates were limited to discussing electoral reform. And you say in your response to Dr. Martin that this is about changing the way politics work. Well, our party has put forward a number of proposals for political reform which we've sent to the government, and we would ask you to seriously look at them, because I haven't been consulted on the political reforms you want to bring in, or at least you claim to want to bring in. Indeed, we read a lot of these in the media. We were promised a number of times, leaders of the opposition, to be brought in, to be talked to be discussed, to be part of this process. That hasn't happened. And we're putting forward proposals to introduce equality proofing for spending priorities, to look at how the Parliament works, how the Executive works, how public bodies work, and also to extend votes in presidential elections to citizens living in the north and to Irish citizens living and working abroad, and to bring into this chamber speaking rights for those who want it for Northern MPs. So there's a whole big pile of stuff that you could easily, first of all, consult us on, and then bring it forward to this chamber. I have to say, I find it hard to take Dr. Martin serious in this issue. Since 1970, there were a total of 12 reports which proposed a reform of the Seanad. Not one was implemented, and Dr. Martin was there for 14 years. Fianna Fáil did nothing to reform the Seanad. Indeed, they used it to, in many ways, reward political cronies. In the last election, their manifesto called for the abolition of the Seanad. They received a mandate to do that, and now they want to retain it. But look, no Democrat can defend the current situation where a small minority elect the Seanad. There's no universal franchise, that some folks have multiple votes, the vast majority of people have no say. But coming to my question, Cian Cordia, has the government sought legal advice on the conduct of their campaign and in the role of those departmental officials, or indeed of the Government Information Service? And I listened very, very intently to your initial response, and you'll know that the Supreme Court found unanimously that parts of the government campaign and the children's referendum were not fair or equal or impartial, and that the government had acted in clear disregard of the McKenna principles. So have those lessons been learned, and what have the government done to ensure that citizens receive independent and unbiased information so that they can make an informed decision on polling day? Gora Margaret.
Well, I certainly agree with Deputy Adams on one point anyway. For over 50 years, the political process in this country failed to deal with report after report of the potential of Seanad Éireann and to reform it or whatever. I myself looked at this, and it's impossible to reform a system that would be still discriminatory, that would be still minority-based, that would still not involve people in the way that this House operates here. And it's not a situation where you want to have some sort of subset of Dáil Éireann set up where everybody, including those abroad, have some measure of votes. So the question is a very straight question. Do you want to keep it or do you want to abolish it? I hope people answer that question very strongly on the abolition side. Now, the reason this didn't go before the Constitutional Convention, I've answered it before to you, Deputy Adams. The Constitutional Convention was part of the programme for government as agreed by the two parties in government to engage with citizens in an analysis of various issues relating to our Constitution, Bunrath na hÉireann, and that the Constitutional Convention, which has worked very well in a thoroughly engaging and comprehensive fashion, would make its views known on a whole range of issues for consideration by government. But in the case of the abolition of the Seanad, the government were already clear what they wished to do. The government made a decision and an agreement as part of the programme to put this question to the people. So it wasn't necessary from a government point of view to have an engagement with the Constitutional Convention for their consideration, because a decision was already made here. As often pointed out, a 5-year period is relatively very short for a government that has a whole programme to implement, given the unprecedented scale of economic deprivation and calamity that afflicted us. Now, I point out to you, Deputy Adams, you mentioned about the conduct of the campaign and officials working on papers. Let's be very clear on this. The small unit in the protocol section of the Department of the Taoiseach were charged, 3 of them, with the production and work on the proposal to give effect to the abolition of the Seanad. That's very normal for any minister and any department. That's what happens. And when that proposal is worked up, it then goes off to the parliamentary draftsmen or draftspeople, and is then the legislation is then drafted on that basis. So the government here are not running a campaign, because this case was obviously taken to the court arising from the children's referendum, and government clearly obliged immediately in respect of the findings of the court. So there is no government campaign in respect of the abolition of the Seanad. The parties in government, members of the parties in government, obviously do campaign. So in that sense, there is not a formal government campaign. It doesn't apply. Government abide fully by the decisions of the court arising from the children's referendum. So as I said in answer to Deputy Martin, the volume of work involved for the very small unit in the Taoiseach's department which worked on the proposal to give effect to the abolition of the Seanad, the question being asked, has greatly diminished, because there is no further engagement from that perspective. So there's no government campaign. Therefore, there's no requirement for legal advice in respect of any of that. It doesn't apply. The parties in government, run their own campaign around the country, it's perfectly normal, Deputy Adams, for officials in whatever government department is sponsoring legislation to work on the preparation of the proposal to be put in a referendum. But I might say to you as well that all of the officials involved were notified by the Minister for the Environment. Just to be clear on this, the legal advice from the Office of the Attorney General in respect of the application of the principles of the McKenna judgment apply here. During the referendum, the government has a right and a duty to give information, to clarify situations, or to give explanations and deal with unforeseen matters in emergency. The government is not entitled to expend public monies for the purpose of promoting a campaign for a particular outcome. The McKenna case concerned money specifically voted to the government for the referendum campaign. Neither the McKenna decision nor any other decision determines that departmental resources may not be used by a minister in a referendum campaign. It's still permissible for the civil service, in support of the government's policy and leadership role, to continue to provide information material to ministers in the form of speeches or reports or briefing material, including during the referendum campaign itself. Now, if I go and attend a public meeting dealing with the referendum organised by my own party. I don't have any material supplied to me for that by the persons working in the department, because it's not a departmental meeting, if you like. The civil service, in the instruction that they received, can never go beyond their normal activities to ensure that it never promotes directly or indirectly a particular outcome in a referendum, nor indulges in what might be termed to be partisan propaganda. And in the letter which came from the Department of the Taoiseach on the 31st of July, it was also very clear that on no account should civil servants provide support for or participate in party political events connected to the referendum campaign, nor should statements made at party or campaign events be referred to on government websites. So, government resources which are normally available to ministers, such as the government websites, can refer to statements made by members of the government in their ministerial capacity. But any passages in statements that advocate a yes vote, for instance, should be and have to be redacted. And that's consistent with practice in previous referendums. I just want to make the case that the principal officer and the two persons working there just do their job in respect of the normal promotion of the proposal by the sponsoring department and me as the sponsoring minister in this case. And that goes to the Parliamentary Council and they draft the legislation. So it's just to be perfectly clear on that.
Deputy Higgins.
Well, Taoiseach, I wouldn't be surprised actually if you needed some of your staff working on the referendum, but particularly to remind you that you are now actually standing for the abolition of the Seanad, when for the 30 years that I and a few others, both in here and outside, demanded the end of that undemocratic elitist institution. You were busily working the system to get your cronies in here and to continue the rule, the undemocratic rule of the 1%. And you might lend another member of staff to the leader of Fianna Fáil to remind him of what he was saying 2.5 years ago when he was castigating this 75-year-old institution for its ineffectiveness. But now apparently he's championing it continuing. So is it any wonder the people out there are cynical? And can I put it to you that the cost is not the key plank really in this. It is the question of the democratic rights of each and every citizen. But do you agree, Taoiseach, that in proposing to get rid of an undemocratic institution, you yourself have no credibility whatsoever, having submitted the Irish people to the two most undemocratic institutions in Europe, the financial markets and the Troika, and having submitted to their demands that the Irish people should carry the burden of private debts of speculators, bankers and bondholders? You've submitted the Irish people to all that. This huge, undemocratic attack on people's economic rights, on their living standards, etc. And now you stand up as a champion of democracy. So, you know, when I call on people to vote yes, to abolish the undemocratic and elitist institution that is the Seanad, the biggest obstacle actually in winning that is the hypocrisy and the lack of credibility of the two government parties that are proposing it.
First of all, you make the point about standing for the abolition of the Seanad. This is the first time I've really had the opportunity to do something about this. I made it perfectly clear when I spoke about this matter a number of years ago that I would carry out a real in-depth analysis of Seanad Éireann and all of that. And before the last election, we made it perfectly clear, as all parties did, for abolition of the Seanad. We've carried that through now to the question being asked on the 4th of October. I don't speak for the voting records of anybody in the Seanad. I've encouraged those who were elected from my own party, obviously, to turn up there, and I've encouraged government members to do so. But I find some of the activities in the Seanad certainly have not done public representation in general any justice. I'd make the point to you, Deputy Higgins, that the people did answer the question about the financial markets, and they answered 60-40 very clearly in respect of the Fiscal Stability Treaty, despite the fact that government were dealing with an unprecedented economic situation here. People in Ireland, in the most democratic way of all, by way of secret ballot and a referendum, gave a very strong endorsement of being linked to the euro, of being linked to the European Union, because of the opportunity and the potential that a 500 million market can provide, and because of the way that this country has been transformed over the last 40 years, through all governments indeed, by virtue of the assistance and cooperation and help that we received from the European Union. And as I pointed out earlier, the engagement of the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure with the Troika has brought about a situation where we have been able to honour the contracts which our country, which our sovereign country, entered into previously, with some details of that changed because of our concern for those who were in more vulnerable positions than others, and because of a real emphasis of government to use whatever flexibility and assets might be applied for job creation and getting people back to work. That's where the economic salvation of the country is. But I thank you for your clarity about your own particular stance in respect of the abolition of the Seanad, and I do hope that on October the 4th the people give a resounding yes to the question that they're being asked.
Deputy Mark.
Well, these three questions relate to the issue of savings of 20 million and the background to that and the basis upon which you made that claim to the Dáil during the passage of the legislation. And Taoiseach, no matter what way you try and get around it, there is no basis for making the false claim that the abolition of the Seanad will save 20 million euros. And indeed, the Commission itself said, and I quote, "It's not possible at this stage to estimate the amount of net actual savings that would arise if the Seanad was abolished. While there would be savings relating to salary costs, parliamentary printing, ICT and support costs, there would be substantial increases in the pension costs and redundancy payments." And the Referendum Commission itself has been unable to substantiate or back up in any shape or form the 20 million claim. And, you know, Taoiseach, you're 38 years in the House, and you spent 34 of those years as a staunch advocate and defender of the Seanad. Okay, and in advance, actually, of your statement and your commitment to abolish the Seanad, you actually did a detailed proposal to the McGill School proposing reform of the Seanad. So, of course, you can reform the Seanad if you want to. And the people should have been given that option of a reformed Seanad directly elected by the people. That option is there if you want to. And in terms of our position and my position, I made it very clear during the election, which you refused to quote, and indeed my opponents refused to quote. We were conditional. We made it very clear that there was a fundamental reform required of government, how government is formed, of the Dáil itself, and indeed of the electoral system, if Seanad Éireann was to be abolished. And absolutely none of that has happened, Taoiseach. And we made that very clear on page 30 of our manifesto, made it very clear. And none of that has happened. Accountability in this House has been reduced since you've come to office. I mean, the property tax went through here in 24 hours. No one could table an amendment. You rammed it through so quickly. On child benefit cut last Christmas, nobody could table an amendment on that. You rammed it home so quickly in 24 hours. And the same with the respite care grant. Now, a noted political scientist, David Farrell, told a gathering last week that Dáil Éireann was the weakest parliament in Europe. And what's going to happen here, of course, is fine, you're getting rid of the upper house, and you're trying to. I think the people may have something to say about that, because what I'm hearing is people are very worried about an over-concentration of power in the hands of a small group of ministers. And that's what will happen. It's increasingly happening with the Economic Management Council. A small group of ministers will end up running the Dáil, which will become a mere rubber stamp for its activities, which it has been for the last 2.5 years on an ongoing basis. And that will be the real democratic deficit. But I would put it to you, Taoiseach, that there is no official basis for the 20 million savings that you have claimed, and it's a very false proposition that you've put to the people.
Sorry. I reject that completely. These figures were provided by the Oireachtas Commission. They are not a claim made by a politician. They are the figures contained in the formal letter from the Oireachtas Commission setting out the direct, indirect and pension costs accruing to the running of the Senate. So I don't accept that in any circumstance, Deputy Martin. Clearly, as I pointed out, when an entity is abolished or merged or changed, direct and indirect costs move on, as this debate has moved on. Now, you say that I've been 34 years defending the setup of Seanad. Well, I made it perfectly clear when I spoke about this that I would look at the thing in some detail to see what the possibilities were. And this is the first time in my life that as head of government, I have the opportunity to engage with people and ask them a direct question. Now, I noticed that you're making comments yourself that one of the things that government could do immediately is to reduce the numbers of ministers of state. You asked me to do this. Well, didn't I read your words about it only today?
No, answer the question.
Only today.
Just
this would give savings to Minister Noonan and Minister Howland. Well, I'd point this out to you. Ministers of state are not appointed by the Taoiseach. They're appointed by government. And you sat at the table and you didn't open your mouth, or maybe you did, but it's not recorded, that I can find anyway, where the government of which you were a member appointed 20 ministers of state, 20 of them. And not only that, but you went on a spending spree for chairman, vice chairman, conveners, and the whole lot. Now, you also make the point about an over-concentration of power. This is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. The Economic Management Council, which I chair myself along with Taoiseach Gilmore, Minister Howland and Minister Noonan, is merely a vehicle to streamline matters that have to be brought to government for collective decision and therefore collective responsibility. Many years ago, maybe before you came in yourself, if you recall the late Deputy Lynch, the late Deputy Haughey, the late Deputy Colley and O'Malley had their own quartet which dealt with all matters related to the budget, or the vast majority of them. So maybe your memory slips a little in that regard, Deputy Martin, I'm not sure. But let me assure you that the Economic Management Council is no concentration of power. Last week you were claiming that we represented the actions of Mussolini. Today you say we represent the antics of Libertas. All I'm saying to you is that this is the fairest and most democratic way you can get results from people when the political process failed because it didn't have the courage to actually recommend decisions, and all the reports that were there were never implemented. Right. So this is no over-concentration of power. This actually is a very genuine attempt to make it in such a way that the people are far more engaged, and that this House here, under 28.4, is seen to be able to live up to its responsibilities. So if you go back to 77 and 79, you will find that the Lynch, Colley, O'Malley and O'Donoghue quartet certainly ruled the roost insofar as the preparation and the implementation of the budget was concerned, long before any Economic Management Council was ever heard of. They had their own cabal operating in the way that politics was delivered. I recall that because I was here myself. Well, I was not in the cabinet. You sat at the cabinet table and allowed 20 ministers of state to be appointed. Everybody you could think of. Have one yourself and have some responsibility assigned to you, whatever it might be.
Sorry, hold a second. Hold on a minute.
I've been engaging in a debate with you now.
We're at 38 minutes on these questions. Now, we're a very quick supplementary from Deputy Adams and Deputy Matthews, and then I'm moving on, because Deputy McHugh is sitting up there. He has 2 questions.
First of all, Sinn Féin is calling for a yes vote in both referendums, and I think for the reasons I've given earlier, that's the right thing to do. But I agree with Dr. Higgins that one of the big problems is the government's support for this position. That's the real problem out there on the hustings. Now, and the reason that's a problem is because in your response earlier on to me, you said, and I quote, "It is not necessary from the government point of view to put this issue into the Constitutional Convention because the decision was taken." So what about the role of the opposition? You know, when I went to the discussions that you chaired on the Constitutional Convention, I don't recall
Sorry, could we get back
Dr. Martin being there. He may have been, but I don't recall him being there. And I made this point. So this comes to the very nub. That utterance of yours comes to the very, very nub. What is the role of the opposition? How does the opposition get its point of view not just aired, which is difficult? Remember, your own chief whip said that your record of political reform was deplorable. So it isn't just a matter of being able to ventilate our position, it's getting the government to take it on board. So yes, the citizens should vote yes in both these referendums, but the government has no credibility in relation to the whole need for root and branch political reform of this quite dysfunctional institution.
Deputy Matthews, have a quick supplementary.
Thanks, Count Corley. I'm in this House and member of the Oireachtas for 2.5 years. Deputy Martin has been
That's grand,
here.
Deputy.
Yeah, just a little preamble for 14, the Taoiseach for approaching 40. And, you know, I think that considering the obstacles, the limitations and the whip system that applies, the Senate, in the 2.5 years that I've witnessed it, has done a very good job. It's brought a lot of amendments to a lot of bills. It has the capability of delaying law by 90 days, which is a chance to pause and reflect.
I can't have speeches for 40 minutes.
I know, Count Corley, but I'm going to ask, why was the haste?
Thank you.
Why was the haste? I don't think it's a good idea. I think that Senator Fergal Quinn has brought in the construction contractors bill successfully.
Deputy, I'd ask for your cooperation,
Senator
please.
John
Please,
I know, Count Corley, but this is very, very important. Senator John Cran has
very
brought in
important,
two
but
bills
it's
in
not
2.5
standing
years.
orders. Thank you.
I think it could be a very grave and a very great mistake, and I want to say that on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Taoiseach.
Yes, well, I take Deputy Adams's point again. The role of the opposition, Deputy Adams, is to hold the government of the day to account. That's the role of the opposition. And that role is defined in Bunrath na hÉireann, Article 28.4, which says it is the constitutional duty of this Dáil, of this House, to hold the government to account, the executive. And that's essentially the role of opposition. We've had examples over the last 10 years where issues raised by the opposition have held the government to account. We want to enhance that because all governments, in the interests of the people and our democracy, need to be held to account. The second thing is that governments have to make decisions. I actually said to, it's no secret, to members of my own party and indeed the cabinet, that for 15 years all you could do was make propositions. But it's a different thing when you have to make decisions and then stand by them. So from that point of view, the Constitutional Convention's responsibility is not to make decisions. Yes, it makes decisions about recommendations, but government have got to decide on the basis of those recommendations what they want to do with them. But I'm saying to you is that if the Constitutional Convention, for instance, were to consider the question of the Seanad, and they were to say, yes, hold on to it. Yes, hold on. Yes, hold on. Would government then say, don't agree with that? We're going to have a referendum on this. So in this case, the government was very clear in the views of the parties before the election and in the programme for government and at its government decisions being made, asked the question. No need for a reflection as to what the government's view was on this question. And I commend, obviously, the Constitutional Convention for the way they've gone about their business. I don't accept, Deputy Matthews, your proposition. I don't accept it. The Seanad was never, I know you're not, the Seanad was never a second house. The Seanad was never, it was a break, if you like, on the proceedings of the Dáil. And while it has the right to delay legislation, that's only been used in very, very rare circumstances. My problem, Deputy Matthews, with the Seanad is that the founding principles of engagement and representation of civic society and sectors of civic society was never adhered to in Seanad Éireann because it was hijacked by the political process, including my own party. And that's one of the reasons why the majority of persons that I was able to appoint to the Seanad, the Taoiseach, were completely and utterly independent of politics, and were not asked by me to vote or support on government issues from the day that they were appointed. But that was not always the case. And we've had occasions in the past where services rendered were thanks honoured and appointments made on that basis. But what we want to do in this House with the revamped committee system is to engage with civic society and the sectors of civic society that were left out of the analysis, the preparation, the consideration and the implementation of the laws of our land. Nothing can be more democratic or more fair than that. And that's another reason why we can manage our affairs much more effectively, much more transparently and in a much more accountable fashion without having a second House which doesn't have constitutional responsibility to hold the government to account. That's what the people demand.